Woo! Alright. For our music friends, that'll be a little puzzle at the very, very start for either the replay crew or the lives, if you know what song that is. Oh, happy Tuesday. I'm back. Man. Okay, so, to not top out the topic yet, what else can we go over? I suppose we could talk about the upper Tor River fish that are up here. So they do this, they think they're getting fed. They'll come right up to the top. They're doing very good. They are quite happy eaters. And liking the flow that's in the flex. They'll spend a lot of time actually up in the flow. So that's kind of nice. Let me see here. Got to interface with a ton of awesome folks at my club, including several people that were there for their first time. It's always, despite the fact that like we're local in Seattle, right? So it's a little more common. It's always like very humbling when someone's like, "I've watched you on YouTube." It's like, thanks. Now you're coming to our club meetings. That's fantastic. So had that kind of fun interaction with some new folks, and yeah, been pretty great. Been getting prepped for Fishtoberfest because that's 3 weeks away, right? Look at a calendar. I'm pretty sure it's 3 weeks away. Been working on my presentation for my talk, all those kind of fun things. Getting the towels done. Oh, I also have to another video I have to put out other than the one for this week, but that'll most likely go to members. Sorry, everybody, but yeah. So busy week, lots of stuff. All right. Yeah, Kingfisher's Catch is gonna get to meet Gary in person as well. That'd be fun. And Gary's got a like huge traveling schedule. I was talking to him. He's up in Canada, and then he goes to Chicago, and then he goes to Australia, and then he comes back to the States and is in Atlanta because he's been doing a huge tour of different conventions, and he's also doing a trip in Australia this year for a collection trip and some stuff like that. So yeah, he's going to be doing some amazing stuff. Gary went and saw numerous club members' places. Unfortunately, I was not one of those because I was kind of busy with some stuff that I just couldn't put off in any way, shape, or form. But he did go to Alyssa Bentley's house, saw the pleco breeding facility that is Alyssa's place. But yeah, it's good stuff. He did his talk. We'll get into the highlights now. We've had enough of me mumbling, right? So he did his talk, which is on his most recent trip, which is where the Kalitawa and the Kalimirasai were found. And I won't go into too much detail, right? Because I think the talk itself is worth watching. Whether it's Johannes's version of the talk, for those of you who get an opportunity to ever see Johannes in person, or Gary's. They're both very, very good. But they went out and collected a number of different fish. They were going all over the bird's head, which if you ever look at the map of Papua, it's like it looks like a big brush turkey, as he always says. It'll put a picture of a brush turkey up, but basically there's this portion up here that's the head when you're looking at the map, and it's a surprising big distance. It's the second largest island in the world. So, don't think that this is small by any means. But yeah, did tons of stuff. The Mirasai are amazing for those who have been lucky enough to get some. Scary Terry just mentioned in chat that recently got some Mirasai and looking amazing. They're a really cool fish. I would say it's going to depend on your personal taste as far as coloration is concerned, whether you think the Tawa is cooler or the Mirasai. For me personally, I kind of think that they sit right here, right? I think they're dead even, and they're cool for different reasons. But they both are just amazing looking fish. So, what are some of the highlights? There's some cool lessons about how Myrisai and Tawa are special in that when you're breeding them, depending on the temperature that you raise the fry, will directly affect the ratio of male to female fish. A lot like in a lot of our live bearers, right? And some other fish too. A lot of, I think Apistogrammas fall under this too, where there's like a sweet spot to get a 50-50 ratio, and you go too cool and it's more of one male or female, and then you go the other way, it's the opposite, right? In the case of the Kalitawa, what we've learned, and this is something that Ryan from Hoon Aquatics was a part of the kind of effectively like research team of figuring this out, was that when you got too hot, you would get almost all females. And if you got really cool, and by cool I mean like 74 degrees or so, you would get a lot more males. But if you sit closer to like 76, 77, somewhere around there, you would get almost a perfect 50-50 ratio. But Johannes Graf, who's in Germany, was seeing the complete opposite. The hotter he got, the more males he would get, and the cooler he got, the more females he would get. So it's very interesting that the group in Germany versus here in the States, we're seeing kind of opposite results in the sense of how the ratios stack up based on temperature, but still seeing that if you're in that sweet spot, it's about 50-50. Which is very, very interesting. To me, that's one of the things that's like, normally that doesn't matter with rainbows. We kind of will always say, hey, put your fry somewhere between 80 and 82, and then from there on out, they're going to grow faster. You do have to feed them more, but you know, for your first at least couple months, keep them around that range. It keeps their metabolism up. You'll see better survival rates, and they just eat and grow a lot faster. Paul Sotero saying it's the water. You know, it's interesting because they said they did a bunch of comparisons of their water and found really small differences. I mean, that's my assumption, is it has to be some differences in the water between Germany and the States. But it's interesting that the water in St. Louis, which is where Gary is, and there's one other person in the U.S. that was doing it too, which is, I believe, Marcel, who's in, I think, Wisconsin, if I remember correctly. And then also up here in Seattle, 3 different locations with somewhat different water, and they're all seeing the exact same results, which that's kind of interesting, right? But yeah, very, very interesting. I actually, so Leo, you're saying that, like, Leo's saying y'all got everything in Washington, soft water and basements, perfect weather. I don't know about perfect weather. Some people really don't like 9 months of cloud and light raining, which I do. You know, I like cool weather, clouds and rain. I love it a lot. But not every house in Washington has a basement. So like my home doesn't have a basement, for example. It's 2 floors. It's more modern built. So what you'll see is more modern built houses don't tend to have basements. All the stuff that was built before the 80s, more likely to have a basement. Or if they're on a hill, then they'll have like one of those step out basements. That's more common in the Seattle area. But if you go to like the other side of the state, basements are way more common. But it's a little more deserty over there, so it makes a little more sense. Let's see, is there anything else from the talk that I think matters? Other than just like anytime you get an opportunity to hear certain speakers talk, Gary Lange's one of them, especially for me. I'm very biased. I'm a Rainbowfish nerd. So inherently, I'm going to say always go see Gary Lange talk. But, you know, I think the same of somebody like Lawrence Kent, who's, I'm very fortunate that he's from my club, but I've heard him do a couple of different talks, and he's got another talk he's doing for our club that I haven't heard yet, and I'm excited for it, right? Because a lot of these people are just great storytellers, and they're fun. They know how to make their presentations not feel like they drag on. And some of the like heavier kind of sciencey ones can feel a little rough. Somebody who I think actually does a fantastic job of that, despite being a little more scientific, is Dr. Eric Lucas, who does Corridoras. And I think he did one for the Aquarium Co-ops Club, if I remember correctly, but he's fantastic. I like that guy quite a lot. He's very, very fun. So the other thing, because I want to, this is a short one. We'll probably get into a lot more Q&A this week. What did I bring home? I actually have 2 species of fish right here in a container beside me so that you guys can see them live on camera. Now, this might frighten you, but they're in a brownie container. See this? You see 2 different species of fish that I brought home in this little container? Are you ready? Has anybody caught on to the trick yet? Check these bad boys out. Eh? So you got a group of Bozemanii, right? And then way over here, we have 1 pair of Kalitawa. These are magnets, if that's not obvious, by sticking to the metal pan. But some of you might have seen in one of, I think it was Jimmy's videos, that he got some magnets from a person who's local craftsman, who actually works at Denny's Pet World, which is a local pet store. Mostly, I go there for fish, but I got in touch with him after visiting Ryan, because Ryan's good friends with him. He's another like super Rainbowfish nerd like me and Ryan, and I kind of have this art project in mind ever since I saw the first ones that Jimmy had, and then I saw some of the ones that Ryan has at his place. But yeah, so he made me up the batch of Bozemanii. I bought the 2 Kalitawa at our club auction because they were way too cheap. I'll be honest, they were way too cheap. And then I purposely paid him a little extra for the ones that I commissioned, because I wanted to give him a little bit more money than he was asking for them. So I think he sells them in the store. Typically they sell for like $20 for per magnet, which that's because the store's got to get their cut and all that kind of stuff. But the next batch that he's doing for me, he's doing another batch of probably 10 more. It might be more. I don't know. I'll have to talk to him. But they'll be running river rainbows. So my goal is to do a like metal print photo of some kind of aquascape or fish tank that doesn't have fish in it yet, and then use the magnets to stick on the metal print as kind of a 2D piece of art. Pseudo 3D, but kind of more 2D in all respects. Piece of art inside one of my fish spaces somewhere. So that's the crazy things that go through my brain. These are the weird things I do, but who knows? Maybe at some point, maybe I'll just commission him to make a whole ton of these and do them as like a giveaway or something. I don't know. I think they're so cool. Like if you just look at the detail, I'll pick up the Kalitawa male, because this thing's pretty incredible. And I'll try not to grab it by the tail. But you can just see, like, come on, camera. Can you do it? Can you focus? I know the light's a little bright, but there we go. You can see, like, all the scales are hand painted, and it does all this cool stuff, and it's done with, I think it's like a 2-part epoxy or something that he mixes up, or it's some kind of clay, but it's all done by hand. He puts on these little, it might be hard to see on that one, but you can see it much better on one of the Bozemanii. So he does all these different positions and stuff, so they're all kind of unique and interesting, but there's a little, like, even the fins, the pectoral fins, they're kind of a clearish white color, right? These are super, super awesome. But yeah, they were really cool, and I had to commission him to make me some because he's a really awesome dude. Now, I did actually bring some fish home, but nothing from Gary Lange. So the same person who made the magnets for me, he has, like, I think he's keeping actively something like 40 species of rainbow. He has a lot. And he had some rainbows that he was looking to get rid of. And it was mostly he wanted to rehome them because they were some of the first rainbows he got early on. And now he's moved on to rarer, harder to find rainbows. And I told him, hey, I've got my retirement tank, so if you don't find somebody who wants to buy them off, or you're just looking to put them somewhere safe, I've got plenty of space in my retirement tank, because there's not a lot of fish in there right now. And he was like, sweet. So he sent me home with one of these guys, which this is a Melanitania Herbert axelrodi. Most commonly, we just call this the yellow rainbow fish, right? So he's one male of this that he had left that he sent me home with, so that's just going to be in my retirement tank for a while. And then also a small group of Kamaka rainbow fish, which shout out to Imperial Tropicals for your beautiful photography. I outright stole them. I know. but it's because your photos are so good. And he gave me a group. I think it's like 3 females and 2 males, or maybe it was 3 males and 2 females. It's 5 fish. That's all I remember. And they're all nice adult size. They're about yay big. And they got into the retirement tank, and like right away they were just swimming all over the place. So they've been doing pretty good. Everybody settled in nice, playing nice with all the other fish that are in there. So it's nice to help him out a little bit, get a few fish out of his fish room that he wanted to remove so that he could have space. I think he's trying to breed a couple specific fish, and he was looking for space to do so, to raise up the fry. And add a few more to my retirement tank, have that community expand a little bit, and just do its thing, let them live out nice and peaceful in a big old planet tank. Okay, we'll start doing questions, and you have to forgive me, my freaking chair broke. It's old, though. I've had this chair for, I think, 8 years. So, it's long in the tooth for a cheap computer chair. I have to go get myself a new one. But there's some great questions that I want to answer. So, first off, because I liked this a lot, from Kingfisher's Catch, what did you learn at the talk? Anything exciting for you? I will say, the thing that I learned that was most interesting is several fish that they caught. There's the Kalitawa, the Chalatharina languru, and there's another, the Kalilobo is the other one. These 3 fish were all in the same water system, caught together, and none of them, from what they can tell, are hybrids. So that means that 2 Melanitania species and a Chalatharina species all were living in the same water system together in the wild, not hybridizing. And this is not a super wide river or massive lake or anything. It's good size, but not something that's like hundreds of feet across. It's probably 30 feet across or something like that. Because the pictures in his talk made it clear it's not huge. So the question is, how do these fish exist for this period of time, which they have to have been there for a long period of time, hundreds of years at least, right, at this point? How have they been there and not hybridized in the wild? And the only answer that they can suspect right now, because they don't really know the truth and they don't have enough time to really, really sit there and spend tons of time doing research. They're there on a very strict schedule, is that they spawn in different places. So what they tended to notice is there's a kind of deep channel in the center of this river or creek, which, by the way, for those that don't know, anytime we say Kali something, when it comes to rainbowfish, Kali is their word for river or creek or stream in Papua. So that's where that comes from. So basically, it's just letting you know it's from this stream. And so they have these 3 fish. They can't name them all Kalitawa. So there's Kalilobo, which, or I guess they don't call it Kalilobo. They just call it species lobo. And that's because that's the name of the village that's nearest to Kalitawa. And then the Languru is the, I guess the region or province that is all a part of. So they find these 3 fish, and basically what they notice is that the deeper channel portion of this region is where the Languru stayed. And then it was up on the shore is where most of the Tawa were, and some of the Lobos, because they caught a few Lobos in with the Tawa. So it's very interesting to find out that some of these fish can exist in the wild without hybridizing. And it had been a theory years and years ago that you would never find more than a single Melanitania and a single Chalatharina living in the same space. Because typically all the Glossolepis, or I think specifically all the Glossolepis, are always in lakes. Well, they've proven that multiple times now, where they found multiple Melanitanias in the same water system but not hybridizing in the wild. So they clearly have to favor slightly different spawning areas in the wild, which prevents hybridization. And you'll notice that a lot of times in mixed rainbow groups, as long as there are males and females of the same species, they will tend to stay together. It's only when you have like a random male that doesn't have a female of his species that they will tend to start chasing other females. However, the reason why we always say never breed them together is because when they are together, let's say that two different fish throw eggs in roughly the same area, there's a potential that the milt from a different species of male will fertilize some of those eggs and create hybrids. And there's some other risks too, but that's the reason why we always say, like, hey, don't try to breed them in the same tank. That's where the problems happen. And, you know, rainbows won't discriminate. You'll see a Chilatharina and a Melanitania. If they don't got a relative member of their species to chase all the time, it will happen. And I can tell you from my personal experience, I've seen it quite a lot where I've got mixed tanks and males and females, as long as they have an appropriate partner from the same species, kind of stick together, which is very interesting. And I've been curious if you could do it in larger numbers if you had a big enough water system in captivity. So I guess when I win that lotto, we'll figure that out, right? But I think that was the thing I learned that was the most interesting, that they're finding multiple species of Melanitania and a Chilatharina all in the same, not very large water system, but no hybrids. And they caught a lot of fish. And they were nothing that indicated hybrids. So very, very interesting to me. I find that because, you know, we have such a fear of hybridization in captivity. And there's even been stories where somebody's released some other random wild rainbow fish into a different water system, like the running river system, and started hybridizing there. So it gets interesting when you see these things where, like, in natural habitats, you have multiple species living together in harmony, not hybridizing. Even though we know rainbows will hybridize. It's very, very fascinating to me that that's how these things happen. Let's see here. All right. Paul Soltero. In a 36 bowfront, rads or pseudomagills. I already have super red Apistococcotoides hanging out at the bottom. So in that case, I would put it to you like this. Pseudomagills are even more notorious jumpers than almost any other rainbow. But more importantly, because they're even smaller than rads, there is a potential that they might get bullied by the coccotoides. So I would probably look at rads because they're a little bit bigger, but not too big. And they will maintain that mid to upper water column, but they're a little less likely to jump than some of the pseudos. I know you're going to have lids and all that stuff, but just in case, because rainbows, when they want to jump, they will find the smallest gap known to man. They're kind of like a lot of your other escape artist fish, only sometimes they decide not to be very jumpy, which I've noticed my running rivers, like, basically just don't jump. They never jump. They just chill, happy as can be. It's very strange. You would think they'd be more likely to jump because they're kind of skittish. Bob Purcell, will Rio Escuro, that's Brightwell's substrate, pull KH out of my water? I am remineralizing RO in a new tank with new substrate and saw essentially 0 KH when I tested the next day, and I dosed a KH booster. I mean, it's potential that it could be removing some amount, but it shouldn't be removing so much that you're testing 0 KH. I would be starting to see if that test might be running on the side of expired. That is a little weird, though. I would also try to back it up with, like, a different test if possible. Like if you can get a small box of strips or something like that. Yeah. Be interesting. Would be interesting to know if it's the test or if it's pulling that much KH out. Like, I can say that I haven't had that much problem, but I could see it more likely to occur with something like Safety Zorb or Oil Dry or anything that really suck up a lot of stuff. Like, there is an amount of nutrition naturally in the Rio Oscuro, so it shouldn't be pulling down too much. But yeah, interesting. Aquatic Lounge. I've been having a problem in one of my tanks with brown diatoms for months now. Any tips on how to figure out why this is happening? So usually when I'm dealing with a lot of brown diatom algae of any form, it usually means I am way overfeeding that tank in some way, shape, or form. Or I have a very messy eater, like plecos, that are producing a lot of diatoms. So my first thing would be, observe how much you're feeding and start trying something like this. If you feed one big feeding every day, try doing one every other day. Or try doing half of what you naturally are feeding. You might look into, if you've got a good number of fish in there, actually getting like a measuring spoon and putting a specific measurement amount of food in every time you feed. And the reason why I go to that well is a recent video, I think it was Zenzo that was doing it. Somebody had the little like two-sided aquarium co-op measuring spoon, the one that's like teaspoon, tablespoon, right? And was specifically walking around using that as a scoop to scoop out food from their container instead of like pulling out pinches of flake and stuff. And to me, it was like, that's a good way to make sure that you're getting the exact same amount. Now, me personally, I got a lot of plants and all that kind of stuff, so I kind of I overfeed my fish, but I usually don't have a lot of problems with diatoms. I have, especially when I had a lot of plecos in a tank, they create tons of detritus, and then it kind of dials it up, especially if you don't have more aggressive plants, in the sense of aggressive growers. If you have slow growers like Java fir and Anubias, stuff like that, you can start seeing some buildup of diatoms when you have fish that naturally like to eat a lot, and then you don't necessarily have the system designed to handle all those excess phosphates. And the big thing of why we focus on food is because you're going to get a lot more phosphates in the system, and brown diatom algae really takes off when there's excess phosphates in the water. Now, some of the other easier things, other than just adjusting your feeding, is do more frequent water changes. That's going to pull out some of that stuff that's in the water that's helping feed those diatoms and slowly get them back in check. You could also look into a type of fish that naturally is a diatom eater. Autocyclists love brown algae. They love it. They will eat it like crazy. A number of different types of shrimp will eat it. Snails will eat it. And this does produce more waste, yes, but it's a way to naturally kind of start putting that diatom issue in check. And then you can slowly work on balancing everything else to make sure you're not seeing some kind of ammonia or nitrite spike. And then you just get something that's naturally kind of consuming it on top of your normal food. Those are kind of the couple of ways that I would approach it. Lady Diane, if we win the lottery, we'll give you your favorite tank. That's very sweet of you. I would never expect that, but I'm like a psycho in some of the ideas in my head. If I had the effectively unlimited funds in the grand scheme of things, I have some dumb ideas in my head. And I say dumb because you probably use that money on much better things. But, when you're a fish hobbyist, it's kind of like an addiction. Connor Costello, which plant should I go with? Dwarf Sagittaria or Chainsword? I have neutral to soft water. GH is high. Well, if your GH is high and your KH is low, I wouldn't say you're necessarily soft water. You just don't have carbon hardness. You have mineral hardness, though. And want to try to use kit tank lights. What are some ways to get nutrients to gravel? Okay, so we've got kind of like a combination of things going on here. In lower light, Dwarf Sagittaria is not going to do as well. It likes medium light and higher. Chainsword can do a little bit better because it naturally is used to slightly lower light environments, but in general, most of your like Vals, Chainswords, any of those, they like medium level light. Otherwise, they'll start reaching up and up and up and getting taller and taller and taller, trying to get into that light to make themselves happy. You might end up being better off with something like actual sword plants, the green ones, not the red ones, because they like long exposure of low light, or crypts. Crypts also do fantastic in low light. Java Fern can do very well in low light as well. So if you're looking to use specifically kit tank lights, that might be some of your options. However, between those two specifically, I would look at the chain sword over the dwarf Sagittaria. Both can, in theory, live. Just dwarf Sagittaria tends to do best when it has more medium light. As far as getting nutrients in the gravel, root tabs. You just put root tabs down in there. You'll be okay. It's a little harder, right? Because it's you don't have something that's going to absorb some of those nutrients as they break down, in the sense of what happens with the CEC capacity of, say, like an aqua soil or something like that. But as long as it's down there, your root-feeding plants are going to go find it and consume it. Also, fish waste, as it gets down in the gravel, is going to become, over time, inert to where it's not dangerous, but will provide some level of nutrition to your plants. That's why in most really heavily planted tanks, especially if they have a lot of root feeders, I don't suggest gravel vacuuming frequently. You want to gravel vac if you start seeing excessive detritus in your substrate layer. Like if it starts building up on top of the substrate, you need a gravel vac. That happens in one of my tanks where I've got a couple bigger Wappenwooster plecos in it with my angels. It just builds up over time, and about once every 2 months or so, I basically just need to skim the top a little bit and get some of that excess detritus out that those plecos are creating. But other than that, when it's down in the substrate, I don't have to worry about it. I got tons of crypts in that tank. They're consuming that stuff constantly. It's not an issue. Doesn't cause problems in the water. Hell, Lumpy Dog, Brewster's Millions, but Bentley style. Yeah. If I ever got to play the true Brewster's Millions, it would be a true psychotic affair. There would be some weird purchases. You guys ever seen that video of the guy who's got like the largest private reef tank in the world, but he engineered everything himself? Like he was like, oh yeah, I couldn't find reactor units that fit the spec I want, so I just engineered my own. And here's my filtration room, and I couldn't find anybody that built X, Y, and Z to the way I want it, so I just engineered it myself. And it's like this guy's crazy, but he builds like super heavy machinery. And just like it was like, yeah, I just engineer everything for myself, and has some like 50,000 gallon or some nonsense like that tank in his home for his reef. I would go like that level of psycho probably. Although he said something like it costs him the power alone to run that tank at something like $5,000 a month. Just the power bill. Bob Purcell, does it seem like I'm assuming you mean quiet crowd tonight? I mean, we're a little lower on number of people here than what is usual, but that might just be because of time of year, weather. Nobody cares about what my club meeting was like. Who knows what it might be? But that doesn't matter. All right, we got folks here. That's what matters. If it's quieter in chat, it's quieter in chat. But that being said, guys, if you do have questions, now's the best time. Less people, less competition to get your answers. At Bentley Pasco makes it super easy for me to see. Yeah. Did a girl YouTuber scuba dive in that tank? I'm not sure if that's the case. I watched an older, like, coolest thing. I think it was like coolest thing I built is what it was titled under, some series. And I'm sure it was aired on a TV show as opposed to strict YouTube, but I don't know, it was one of those things where I was just watching more and more, and I'm like, okay, you've clearly been very successful in life and maybe have too much money, but man, that tank is freaking impressive. Oh man, it's just one of those things where you see people who build this kind of stuff and you're like, all right, I thought some of my ideas were crazy. Bob Purcell is playing the game from Triple Crown, which is, did we ever hear what fish you would get in the 150 gallon tripped out fish tank with a single species? So, I kind of have like 3 answers to that, but yes. So if we were going something I don't have, which I think is the fun one, right? a kind of fish I don't have. I would build something a little weird, which is to say I would want my 150-gallon tank to only be 12 inches tall. And I would want it to be longer and deeper. So it was kind of like a river system. And I would build a river tank. And I would specifically want it to be cold water. So not a tropical tank. See, there's some people who have some interesting guesses, but not true. So not Pseudomagil Melis. Melis is tropical. I would want to do rainbow shiners. Because I think that's something that we don't see in a big enough system. So if we have a really big system where we can get a large number of that fish at a much higher churn rate, I think it would make for a very interesting custom tank. Now, if we were doing a more common 150 build, like the 5x2x2, I would have a different answer. But because some of the stipulations are, it's a custom-built tank with all of the equipment you could ever need to run it, right? We can do some really crazy things. Or the other option, this is the way that like you break the system of this game. It's cool. I will have a 150-gallon tank, that's fine, with a 1,000-gallon sump. Because I said all the equipment you need to run it, and I only specified the tank, so that you can have this massive filter, so you end up having this huge water system, so that you can move a lot of water, or keep your water very stable. And in that case, because I have a ton of water and I can keep it very stable and keep it topped off very easily, I would look at, and you don't need a 1,000-gallon sump to do this. You could probably do it with like a 200-gallon sump or something large, but just enough to get very, very balanced water. I would look at doing Pseudomagil cyanodorsalis, which is a brackish water fish that I think is freaking beautiful. Let me see if I've still got a picture of cyanodorsalis that I can show you guys real fast. I am pretty sure I've got one somewhere. The question is, can I find it quickly? That's the real question. Were we smart? Did we save it in somewhere that we visit regularly? Probably not. Uh-oh, already failing. Haven't found it quickly. I have like 4 different places where I store pictures on my particular machine that I'm using. And, yeah. I don't appear to have cyanodorsalis, which means that I'd have to go download it. Anyway, it's a super cool fish. It'd be different, and because you can build a much larger tank, you can build a very stable water system, which is good for brackish. Yeah, I like when you get those weird things. I like doing weird stuff because naturally, like, right, the 2 fish that I love the most, Running River Rainbowfish and the Bozeman, most likely for me to build big tanks out of them, or some other kind of flashy rainbow fish that has a lot of character to it, like the Chilatherina blaheri, the party animal, right? I like that fish a lot. But when we can play this kind of magical Christmas land style game, right, with bourbon dollars, and we can make these like really insane things, I like playing a little outside the box and having a little more fun with it, because then it becomes this interesting exercise. And the people who I think did it the most interesting, like, kind of played a little outside the box and went outside of like just the standard thought process, like, or had one of those things that's just like total nostalgia, like Carrie, right? Because Carrie was like, I just want mutt guppies. I just want 1 million mutt guppies. And it's like, you can't help but respect that, because it's like going straight to the nostalgia, the first thing you kept as a kid, and just having 1 billion of them. Because it feels like that, right? As an adult, if you had a 150-gallon tank full of mutt guppies just doing their thing, it's going to feel like when you were a little kid and you looked at a tank and saw a bunch of guppies in your first fish tank, right? Because the scale fits. And it's one of those things that I think is like really awesome from a nostalgia point of view. So I like that answer a lot. And then also the people who like to try and break the rules, sort of. Because there's not a lot of rules. It's where we have some fun with it. Brandon, first question, when dosing macros and micros, is it okay to have them dosed at separate times of day? I know dosing both at the same time is, I'm not sure what you're trying to say there, but not what you want. In general, usually you want to dose them every other day. So like you'll go macros on this day, micros the next day, then macros, then micros, and macros, and micros. It depends who makes the set. Usually if it's powdered, you want to do it like that. You want to alternate. If it's already a liquid, it probably has one of the stabilizers in it that prevents them from fighting with each other. And then you're probably fine if you do like macros in the morning, micros in the afternoon. I think you would be okay in that case. Desert Fish Keeper, I'm not sure if I want something so big then I can't maintain it myself. The thought of someone else touching my tank makes me tense. Maybe I'm just a psycho. Well, so in that case, right, a large tank, because keep in mind, we're only 150 gallons, right? So when you're only 12 inches tall, you're just making it longer and deeper to make up the gallonage. But at 12 inches tall, actually, the maintenance is very easy. Now, granted, if you have a huge sump, that's where it gets a little crazy. But part of that is because you think about it, now you can have the sump much taller underneath. Because you only have this 12-inch tall tank, right? You can bring that tank quite a lot higher to get it right here at, like, your chest. And then it leaves you all this room underneath for a really big sump. But the sump can have the same dimensions, just be taller, and now it has way more water capacity, right? Right? So it's not as bad. You got to think like the engineering side of it's not as crazy as you might think when it comes to maintenance, because with it not being very tall, you can easily reach inside and work on things. And the big thing is if you're doing a big like river style tank, you're probably not going to have a ton of plants, or if you are, you're going to have a lot of stuff coming out of the water, right? You're going to do a lot of immersed grown things where it's anchored down in the water system, but it's coming, the foliage is coming out of the water. And that also can be a very like striking thing to see in person, right? You get wood coming out and doing all this crazy stuff, or rock, plants, mosses all over the place. You can make something really incredible, but also really suited for that kind of thin, awesome fish that is the rainbow shiner. Try to make a more common fish a little cooler. Oh, there's chat. Chat's picking up. Awesome. Kingfisher's Guest. Bentley, what has been your experience with Dutch-style aquascapes? They look beautiful, however, the commitment is a toughie. Anyone in chat? I think you summed it up exactly. The look is amazing, but the maintenance is an absolute bear. It just takes a ton of time, a lot of work. I would never want to keep multiple Dutch aquascapes. I probably don't even want to keep a very large Dutch aquascape. I probably wouldn't do more than about a 30-gallon tank in Dutch. I've never done true Dutch because I'm not an aquascaper. I'm terrible at that stuff. But mostly because I just don't want to do that much maintenance work. I know some people that have really amazing Dutch tanks that are big, but they need to spend hours and hours and hours working on them every month. Their monthly maintenance is something like a 4 or 5 hour affair. And to me, it's like, I don't got that kind of time, man. Johnny at Dance Fish. We almost ordered some Cyano dorsalis because the supplier made it sound like they were bred in fresh water. No way in. Yeah. Cyano dorsalis can basically live in full salt. There are people who have kept them with corals, although that's not a very smart idea because rainbows are kind of dumb, even the pseudomagills, and they'll go down there and get stung and, yeah, game over because they're little fish. But you can keep them in basically full salt water with other saltwater fish. I've seen that before. And it can be very interesting to see these little Cyano dorsalis just darting in and out of like a full saltwater tank. It's pretty wild. Adam Lash, Redroot floater question, and Salvinia. Near transition well into my tanks. Fairy moss does well. Tried high and low light, different ferts. I do have hard water. Okay, so Redroot floaters and Salvinia never transition. Fairy moss does well. Tried. Okay, so my big question is going to be this. How much space is between the lid of your tank and the top of your floating plants? And let me explain. salvinia, red root floaters, and sometimes Asian watergrass does this too. Usually dwarf water lettuce doesn't, and frogbit doesn't. But some of the finer, smaller leafed floating plants, if they are too humid on the top of their leaves, they will die. They just never do well. They want to have more open tank so that they're pretty dry on top, and it's really only the underside and the roots that are in the water. And they have access to free-flowing atmospheric CO2. So if you're using a lid and you keep your water level high and there's only like an inch or 2 inches, it's probably getting too humid, especially if you're at a tropical temperature, anywhere like 74 plus. And that's actually what's causing some of the problems that you're having with those plants. Also keep in mind that if you're staying somewhere in that 0 to 5 ppm of nitrates, those are very, very nitrate-hungry plants, and you probably actually don't have enough nitrates, and they're fighting with each other and starving each other out, on top of all the other plants in your tank. So you really want to sit somewhere between 10 and 20 parts per million on average whenever you test. Maybe even slightly getting into that 20 to 40 range, because they're going to very aggressively eat up those nitrates when they're happy. Make sure I didn't miss a question here. I think I'm good so far. Rocky and Miles, how many Amano shrimp in a 20-gallon neon tetra rasbora tank would an epistogramma work also? So it depends on the epistogramma. Some of the slightly larger epistos might pick on or kill those Amano shrimp. It really depends. Now, if you have big full adults, you're probably okay. And in general, I would say in a 20-gallon, 8 Amanos is probably a good number. But just make sure if you don't have a lot of algae in that tank, make sure there's a food that stays on the bottom surface of the tank that they get to eat, right? So whether that's like a sinking wafer, or an algae wafer, or something else, some kind of granule food that sinks relatively fast, make sure there's food for them specifically, outside of just the food that you feed to the tetras and the rasboras. And you should be fine. Legion Aquatics, Bentley, would you rather use a night crew or JCMP, or is there a better budget light? I actually don't have very high opinions of night crews, but it's probably biased. And part of it is just that every time I've seen a night crew, they don't last very long. I will say, despite whatever my negatives might be for the JCMP, which JCMP and Haiger are basically the same in the sense of they have very similar products that they bring in from China. And, Night Crew's doing something similar too, don't get me wrong, but they just choose different products that I think are lower quality. Or at least in my experience thus far. I have yet to have a Night Crew light really impress me. JCMP and Haiger are bringing in a better quality product at a cheap price. Just don't get it wet. Just don't dunk it into your tank. It's probably fried then. But in general, I've seen more dimming issues with the Night Crew, and I've not seen that with the JCMPs. And from my understanding of talking to other people who have the Haiger lights, they're also not seeing that in the Haiger lights. It's kind of like beams work. Beams work over time. Usually within the first year, there's a dim that happens, and then 2 years later, there's a significant dim that happens. From my experience with some friends, Night Crew does the same thing. It's a nice cheap light, but don't expect it to do you favors when it's cheap, right? Paul Soltero is talking about Hemiochromis Exel. So that's the jewel cichlid that Alex has, right? Isn't it the Secret History? I think that's the same jewel cichlid he's got, right? It's a smaller jewel cichlid. It's pretty cool. Desert Fish Keeper, I was referring to the 50,000 gallon reef. It might be the same one. I just don't know off the top of my head. If you're talking about the one that had the gal swimming in it, the YouTuber. I don't know off the top of my head. I could probably go look at it and find out, but. Brian, question. Java fern, Anubias, and African water fern from Petco. So that's Bulbitis, most likely. The ones in tubes. How to best convert to submersed. Wire to small rocks for weeks, months, grow out before using an escape. That I would probably do something similar to that, is get myself some kind of rock or other anchor. One thing, if you want to be kind of tricky, you could use some PVC tubing. I've done that with Java Fern, where you basically like drill slots or holes into it, and then you can run a tie through that around the PVC tubing, and it's really easy to pull out and move. Also, it's dirt cheap compared to, say, some stones, unless you're just going to a rock yard. But if you're trying to buy like stone at a fish store, they charge a lot of money for that stuff. But yeah, I would just tie it up to some kind of rock and let it grow out a little bit and do its thing. Most of those convert fairly well, especially in my experience, Java Fern and Bulbitis, so African water fern. I rarely have issues with those. Anubias can have a little more issues, but it's a pretty stable plant. Just don't have your light too bright. I wouldn't go much more than about medium level lights, and be ready to dim your lights down if you can dim them. And also, don't over fertilize. Right, not a lot of these are chewing up a ton of nutrients, so you don't want to like have too much and then cause some kind of algae issue, and they are now fighting algae in a war that they can't necessarily win. Let's see here. Stephen P. Aquardics. What's up, buddy? I feel like one Dutch aquascape requires 3 more tanks just for plant farming. You're not wrong. Dutch takes some time. Or money. You just need to like start with 8 million pots of stuff. Brian Kim. Any advice on fighting root rot in Anubias? I've got 3 tanks of different sizes with different species of fish and plants ranging from high temp to ambient temp with issues with rot. Oof. Okay. So, first off, you need any rot that is present, you need to cut away. So let's say my finger is the Anubias rhizome, right? And let's say that we're seeing rot up to like where my fingernail is here, right? I would cut all the way back to this knuckle. You want to distance, you don't want to get too close to the rot. You want to cut way behind it. And most importantly, when you do this cut, use a razor blade. The sharpest, thinnest blade you can get. Because any broader blades, even scissors that are designed to cut in aquarium plants, right? All your like aquascaping scissors and all that stuff, they're not as sharp as a razor blade, and they apply an amount of crushing force to the rhizome. That crushing force can re-trigger or create a new version of the same Anubias rot problem. It's something that me and several people that I trust quite a lot have observed over time. I don't have science to prove it. It's just something we've observed. So take that with 800 grains of salt, right? But in our experience, using a very good razor blade, if you can get like the single blade razor that you use for shaving your face, those are like the thinnest ones possible, the ones that are like double-sided, and you know how to manage one of those without cutting yourself, those are the best. They're perfect. Or just go get a standard razor blade that's got the little, the little back on it that you would use for like box cutting and stuff like that. Get a nice, fresh, clean one and do your cuts with that. From there, one of the things you'll probably want to look at doing is making sure that your mineral content is good. And this is similar to how we'll treat sick fish. I would get something like a good marine salt in your tank and do 1 tablespoon of salt per 20 gallons of water. And why do we do this? Really, all we're trying to do is add a little extra mineral content to help boost that plant as it's now been broken and it needs to trigger new growth, right? This is something that happens in nature, right? Something happens, something disturbs that plant, it breaks, it goes away somewhere, and now it's trying to trigger new growth, anchor into a spot, and get healthy again. We want to make sure that it has the mineral content it needs to do this well. And that includes making sure your fertilizers are good, especially your micros. Your micros matter a ton. So if you're not already supplementing some kind of extra micro, Flourish Trace is fine. You don't, even though I love to poo-poo the whole Flourish system, getting just like Trace or Brightwell's Florin Multi is another good one, is great. And make sure it's something that has a little bit of potassium in it. Potassium is really important for this stage. Not quite as important as, say, like what a Java Fern cares about. They're potassium hogs. But making sure there's some potassium in there is important. You can't just dose just like nitrogen or just fish waste and be enough. You need to provide a little extra of that nutrient content so that it builds itself back up and can try to fight and repair. we're removing, think of it like gangrene, right? We've got to remove all of the problem and hope that the rest of the body can recover. It's very tough. There's no like sure answer to Anubias rot, but the few times that I've dealt with it and had success, that is the approach I've taken. Hopefully that will help you, Brian. Leo209 Aquatics, what would cause Amazon's sword to become transparent? Not enough nitrogen. Not enough nutrients. It's a very, very aggressive eater, man. That plant loves its nutrients, and if it's not getting enough, that's going to happen. It's consuming itself. When it goes transparent, if you're talking like that transparent white color, it's because it's consuming itself, trying to keep the rest of the plant alive. Adam, I don't use lids. That's what's so frustrating. I do have heavily planted tanks. Nitrates too low makes sense. Thanks. Yeah, hopefully we can get that figured out for you, Adam. Hopefully. I've struggled with certain... I've luckily been very good with Salvinia. Also, if you have too much flow, a lot of your floaters hate flow, but you probably don't, given just some of the other things you've mentioned. But yeah. Johnny and Dan's Fist, the Cherkana Jewel Cichlid. Thank you. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, the Exul. It's a very pretty fish. A while back, Alex was trying to give me a bunch of them. I was like, dude, I don't have room. I don't have room for new rainbows, let alone this other fish that's not a rainbow fish. Kingfisher's Catch, will Geophagus Tapajos get along with bows? Absolutely. Just make sure that you have the appropriate substate for the Geophagus, and you'll be fine. They're all peaceful fish. They're not going to bother each other. Leo2 Non-Aquatics, how hard is it to find running river rainbows? Yes and no. You can find them from Dan's Fish every so often. He gets some in from a hobbyist who breeds them here in the States. That same hobbyist is someone who sells, that's Roseline17. He sells on Aquabit every once in a while, and he's selling them reasonably often. Let's see. Let's go to Aquabit and see right now. Are there any running rivers up for sale? See here, Parkinsona, Aves Creek, Goldie-eyed Tapani. Ooh, that's not a very common fish. Van Huron-eye Fowey Village. Man, there's some good stuff up here. Jeez. I'm not supposed to look at this stuff. It makes me want to spend money, and that's bad. Centaniensis. Looks like no running rivers at the moment. But that probably just means that they're raising up. Well, okay, there's a second page. Jeez. I might be wrong. No. As of right now, no running rivers. However, I'm sure Dan will get some relatively soon. In the grand scheme of things. Oh, God. This broken chair is killing me, man. I gotta order a new one. I keep putting it off because I'm working too much. And we're rainbow heavy. Yeah, I'm a rainbow psycho. I can't help it. I love them too much. I put rainbows in smaller tanks than I should. Okay. Bob Purcell has an interesting question. I'll do that, and then I'll dip back to these other couple. Okay, so hold on. Let me do this in order. I'm sorry. Paul Saltero. The Exol is bright red and less antisocial than other jewel cichlids. Also, the new Higer lights have a ramp up and ramp down feature. That's fantastic. I'm glad that some of the cheaper lights are getting that, because I think that's way better for your fish's like health, as far as like not getting skittish, than just the suddenly on. Scary Terry, Dan has the Centennial I want. Yeah, he's got the good line. But I have a line directly to the breeder. Ha ha! Also, I now have kind of some direct content to Johannes Graf, so that's nice. Legion Aquatics, what are your thoughts on using little filtration and just using it for water movement and relying on plants and gravel for biological filtration like MD, unlike the ADA guys? So I wouldn't necessarily rely on gravel, but relying on substrate as a whole, some level of substrate systems, certainly. Plants are really doing most of the work. Your substrate is just some level of surface area, but the plants are another surface area for those beneficial bacteria, and the plants will do a ton of work if they have things available. But then at that point, you need to be using the right plants, aka you need more aggressive growers to handle those things, especially if you go for a heavier fish load. However, yeah, Oh my, Johnny and Dancefish. We have 89 tanks empty, ready for a big rainbow order next week. What you getting, Johnny? Huh? Man, every time big rainbow orders come in with Dan, I hear my wallet crying and trying to find a hiding place. But I've been a very good boy for the last year and a half, not really buying fish. Or at least not buying fish the way I would buy them. Put it that way. Because I don't have space for them right now. But soon. Oh. I cannot wait. I cannot wait for when I can start buying fish again like a psycho and spend way too much money. I'm gonna get dirt poor. I told Dan, I want you guys to know this. Whenever I can build my garage, bare minimum I expect to spend $3,000 with Dan. Psycho. I'm trying hard to hold back on ordering fish. Yeah, me too, bud. Me too. Okay, buy or sell. Let's get to your question because I like this question. What's the outlook on the Seahawks? Will they be Java Fern in your retirement tank or an Amazon sword with your Wobbin booster? Amazon sword with my Wobbin booster. I think the first game of the season against the Broncos was a very emotional game in which the team and the players had far more drive to play above and beyond normal. They wanted that win so bad, and you could see it every time the defense was on the field with on the 1 yard line putting up these incredible stops. That is 100% emotion. That's all that adrenaline that comes in from desiring something so bad because you're kind of pissed that things went the way they did. And mostly because, you kind of got bad-mouthed some. However, you then watch how we played against the 49ers, and we looked abysmal. We weren't tackling very well. We were not really moving the ball very well. We made mistakes. Lots of penalties. And I honestly expect that to be a majority of our season. Just gonna get our butts kicked. And that's fine. We had a freaking decade of being a really good team, so gotta have some suck sometimes. What's been surprising me is the fact that, the Giants are 2-0. And actually look good. Best Salvinia to get for a Pleco tank. Want to control the nitrates. We'll just... I wouldn't necessarily do Salvinia. I would probably look at dwarf water lettuce. That stuff's nigh unkillable. Or frog bit. That's what I would look at those two. Plus they're easy to find, Leo. You don't have to find anything too crazy. What's my favorite floating plant or moss? It's a plant that technically isn't a floating plant, but is used like a floating plant. And the one that I use the most is just broadleaf water sprite. And it's a different version of the standard water sprite, but it's a little bit broader leaf, looks cooler. I just like that plant a lot. But if you really wanted to get into a true floating plant that I like the most, Asian watergrass. Because it has such a different appearance than any other floating plant. It grows really, really cool, and it's really low maintenance in the grand scheme of things, even compared to... But also, if you want to remove it, it's easy to remove. So it's not like duckweed or any of that crazy nonsense. It's a nightmare to get rid of. If you really want it gone and you're tired of it, it's easy to get rid of. But it's also easy to grow, and it's easy to start from just a single little small bit of it. Because it's a really sweet plant. And it provides really cool cover. Because it's these big flat blades of grass. It's really nice. Corey Mount, just wanted to thank you for your help a few days ago. I messaged you on Facebook. Just it's kind of a miracle. I really don't pay that much attention to Facebook. I highly suggest people not message me on Facebook because I'm less likely to answer there. But yeah, you caught me on a rare time. But yeah, glad to hear that your problem's resolving itself, Corey. Just keep checking in with me every once in a while. Even once you get to the part of if it fully resolves itself, just let me know. Because that puts me at ease, makes me feel like I did good, right? It's I done right. Oh, Johnny, why are you asking these questions? Why are you asking these questions? I'll make sure that I'm, like, not thinking what you're saying is wrong. Oh, yeah, this stuff. Right. Water mimosa. So, funny story with that particular plant, especially. So, Neptunia aquatica, water mimosa, I had some on order with another person in my club, and it was supposed to come in March of 2020. We already seeing the problem? So we ordered it, and I think like the very next day was when a ton of the huge lockdowns occurred. And all of a sudden, people are ordering stuff like crazy, and the company that I ordered from took a long time to ship anything, and then it got lost in the mail. And then there's like no dice from there on out. Because like we tried to get it replaced, we tried to do all this stuff, and they couldn't. And yeah, it was just like, nope, give up. And even the person who was in charge of the order, who's a local club member, works at a local fish store, really awesome person, does some cool art and stuff, and was like, hey, I'll pay you back. And I was like, don't even worry about it. It cost me like $10. I don't care. Like, it was $10. I don't care. It sucks that we got hit by this, but like, we're all going to be in lockdown for eternity. Hopefully it's only a couple weeks. And then I remember 3 months later going like, hopefully it's only a few more months. 2 years later, it's like, it's almost back to normal. Yeah. Alex Kumanoff. Seahawks went with a geriatric coach instead of competent quarterback. Yeah, I felt that sentiment too. But you also have to keep in mind that, like, at points Russ is not doing himself favors. You know, he's saying a lot of very negative things about everyone around him, and that's not going to put anyone on your side. You know, you're smack talking your O-line constantly, but then when you get an interview, you're like, oh, you know, the O-line did XYZ, and like trying to give them compliments. Like, they know what's fake and what's true, right? When you're blaming problems on your O-line, and granted, the Seahawks needed to draft O-line, but you don't do yourself favors. That's where you piss your team off. That's not good. It's not good. No, YouTube, I don't want to run an ad. Leave me alone. Bravehearts 1986. Hey, Bentley, just wondering which fish tank mates you would recommend for rainbow shiners. The temperature in my tank is 61 Fahrenheit. Darters. They live in the same water conditions. You can get like a green darter, or there's as many shiners there's that many darters, and darters live a little closer to like gobies. So they kind of live together in a really cool fashion. They actually can live in very similar environments very, very well. Now, if you're looking for something specific, that's where we have to go into like some longer talks about other stuff. But there's a lot of cool water fish. You could do things like white clouds. They live in cold water. You could do rice fish. It just depends on the amount of flow that you're doing for the shiners. If you're doing higher flow, I would look at darters. If you're doing a little bit lower flow, more common to what we would do in most of our normal tanks, then you can look at a ton of stuff. There's a ton of stuff that doesn't even live naturally together that are fantastic. Yeah, rainbow darters are freaking amazing. So you could have the rainbow tank, rainbow darters, and rainbow shiners, and not actual rainbow fish. Can be cheeky about it. Okay, it's going to be my last question. Oh, no, maybe two of them. Hold on. Really fast. Legion Aquatics. Want to do an epiphyte with only some crypts. Epiphyte only with some crypts. Well, that's not epiphyte only. In my 40 gallon. 10 Praecox rainbows. Do you think I need big filtration, or would a decently sized internal filter like the Sea Chase Shark Pro work? It depends on the amount of flow you want. If you want more flow, then I would just get yourself some kind of like hang on the back that pushes a lot of water and not worry about it doing the filtration work. Right? If you're doing a lot of epiphytes and some crypts, they're going to do most of the work for you as far as biocapacity is concerned. But if you're not worried about a ton of flow, then yeah, the Sea Chase should be fine. If you're only doing like 10 Praecox and that's it, no other fish, fine. Just don't overfeed your tank, you'll be all right. All right, Bob Purcell, my last question for the night. Was talking to someone who was getting a Mustang Mach 2 or 3 and was wondering, how was the transition to an electric car for someone who grew up around muscle cars? That's Cool question. So I actually was talking about this. I had to get some maintenance done on my car today, in prep for my trip to Portland, and my service guy was letting me know, like, hey, just so you know, your tires are down to about 3/32. You're going to want to consider replacing them soon. And I said, okay, how soon? Just, based on average drivers. And he goes, well, do you put your foot into it a lot? And I went, no. It's like I used to drive, high horsepower, relatively high torque Mustang. And I know how to not burn my tires up in that car, and I don't do that in my electric because I know it's just 100% power on demand, and you can just roast your tires in those things. And I like to be relatively babyish on my rubber because rubber is very expensive. And so I was like, oh yeah, unless we start dealing with a ton of inclement weather, like really heavy rain or some snow, you're fine for probably at least a month. If you need like some time or you got some budgeting or whatever it might be. And I was like, no, I just have a trip down to Portland in like 3 weeks. And he's like, oh yeah, you can wait until after that trip and you'll be all right. It's like, cool. So the big thing is, it depends on how you drive. If you're like a maniac that's always trying to like think that every stoplight is a new drag race, then getting into an electric is going to be an alien world because they have so much torque and they're so fast and so powerful immediately. And you will destroy your tires left and right. It will cost you an arm and a leg in tires before you learn to chill out. But if you drive relatively calmly and you just enjoy the vehicle for what the vehicle is, then really the big difference is getting used to not churning through a ton of gas and knowing that like you have to change your schedule around how you charge your electric vehicle. So for me, because I don't really have a charger at my home yet, every once in a while I have to go to one of the charging stations, and that's about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. But that's when I get to sit. I often get to consume a bit of YouTube. I just get to be alone with my thoughts. There's quite a few videos that I've done recently that literally have been me watching a video in my car while charging and then going, idea. Right? I have something I want to talk about. An example would be like the video that's coming out this week, this Saturday. It literally was me watching a video charging my car, and it was like, I need to talk about this. So yeah. Anyway, yeah. Hopefully that helps you find folks. But yeah, I would say if you're going to an electric from like previously dealing with, muscle cars or any form of sports car, the transition is not too bad if you're not someone who always is putting your foot into it. If you're always putting your foot into it, it will be a stark transition. It's going to be fun for the first few days, weeks, maybe even, where you're just like, geez, this thing just flies off the line. But then like you're going to pay the piper eventually, and you're going to be like, oh, I'm spending like $1,500 on tires because the car weighs so much with all the batteries. Weird. These are the weird things you learn, right? You make these big adjustments and big changes. It's like if you were to go from driving a family sedan to driving like a 400 horsepower sports car, right? It drives way different, but then you just make some small adjustments and all of a sudden it's just like, oh, it's just nice and easy peasy. No problems. As long as you're not like a psycho on the road, you're fine. All right, gang. Thank you, everybody, so much. It's been a blast, as always. It's been such a joy talking with you wonderful folks in chat. I'll be at Fishtoberfest October 8th and 9th. That's like 3 weeks from now. Hopefully, I get to see a few of you there. You will be able to pick up the sweet new merch. Yeah. That's it. That's all I got. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome. Y'all have a good week.